everybody. We are continuing in chapter 242, first chapter of Enoch Shabbos. We last week gave an introduction into the laws of Shabbos, an overview of the samanim of the different chapters, and we began. And we began reviewing inside the first sif, which there's only one, first halacha, which mentioned a few different things. It discussed the mitzvah of spending money for Shabbos and when not to spend, which we're going to go into today. Laundry, hafrashas challah, and that meat bereka. That's what the pashtida. That's what we discussed last week. And that then brought us into a discussion brought in all the achreinim regarding the mitzvah of kavod and Enoch Shabbos. What we explained is that there is a dispute amongst the Rishonim as to whether the command of Enoch and kavod Shabbos is biblical or is rabbinical. And while the Alter Rebbe here did not give a conclusion, an arbitration to that debate, he does write that even if you follow the approach that it's rabbinical, matters of rabbinical status on a certain degree are even more severe than matters from the Torah itself. And therefore one shouldn't, chas v'shalom, belittle the mitzvah of kavod and Enoch Shabbos just because it may be, according to one approach, only a rabbinical command and not a biblical command. And we read from inside the Alter Rebbe, he brings from the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud Ches, that being careful in this mitzvah, schara mafurish b'Kabbalah, his reward is explicitly written in Scripture of Nach, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, that he will receive, bask in the pleasure of Hashem, and Hashem will forgive all of his sins and to be saved from the judgment of Gehenna. We explained this in length last week, of why does a person receive such great prizes for doing something enjoyable, eating good food, especially when you're not the one preparing it. So. Why should a person get all these? So we explained this last week, that it's first the person has to tshuva, it's for the person that's interested in the Einig of Shabbos to connect with Hashem, to have pleasure with Hashem. So that brings about the forgiveness and the cleansing of sin. We then went into, and this is what we concluded last week's class with, whether the eskafia, the idea of holding back from indulging in foods applies on Shabbos or not. And we explained ideally it does not, as that's the whole mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos, to indulge for the sake of pleasuring Shabbos. And nonetheless, Chassidim and Anshe Maaseh, there were individuals who did abstain because the mitzvah is, as we clarified from the Poskim, is to receive pleasure due to Shabbos and not to pleasure the animal soul on Shabbos. It's to have in mind to do it for the sake of Shabbos, so since this is a fine line where it's hard to draw the line of where it's for yourself or for the sake of God, for the sake of Shabbos. So there were Chassidim and Anshe Maaseh who would control themselves. We discussed this last week, many different sources and Poskim who discussed this. We're going to continue now, and we're going to give an overview of all the matters that relate to kavod and Enoch Shabbos that will be elaborated on throughout many of these chapters as we will go through them. Because of the two mitzvahs that we have of kavod and Enoch, whether you view them as biblical or as rabbinical, there are a number of things that were instituted as part of the fulfillment of these two mitzvahs. So there's a list of Enoch mitzvahs, and there's a list of kavod mitzvahs. So let's first do the Enoch.
We're not in the Shulchan Aruch Machaber now, we're in the Alter Rebbe.
This compilation is compiled from different samanim in the Shulchan Aruch. This is not in the Alter Rebbe explicit, it's not in the Shulchan Aruch. They didn't make a list. So this is, you learn the whole thing, and then you put together, where does it say this is due to Enoch, where does it say this is due to kavod, and then we have a list of what belongs to what. Okay, so as I'm saying, we will learn about these in depth as we continue through the different chapters. So first off, as the Alter Rebbe explicitly mentions, over here that the sages defined the mitzvah of Enoch as Anga ba'achila v'shtia, eating and drinking. So even though we're going to have a list here of 6 different things that are included in Enoch Shabbos, it doesn't negate that the primary mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos, as the sages defined, is specifically with food. Eating and drinking. Notice also drinking. And that's why this will not be repeated later on. We're going to mention this now. It's not mentioned anywhere else. That the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos includes drinks as well. So therefore, just having water at the table for Shabbos would not fulfill Enoch b'shtia. So it doesn't mean you have to drink sugar-filled drinks on Shabbos if you don't like doing them. Not very healthy. You can have tea, you can have whatever you want. Something that's out of, something that's exotic, something that's a little more pleasurable.
Outside of wine, in addition?
Oh, correct. So wine would definitely fulfill that, or grape juice. So I agree with you 100%. Now, would it be fulfilled if someone just drank a little bit of wine for Kiddush, or the person that tastes a little bit of wine? Usually, it's not just, you have a little tiny piece of the Eitzadei Chayv. It's that the Su'udah itself is set on wine. We find this in Hilchos Yantif, that to fulfill the mitzvah of Einig Yantif, it says that you have to set the Su'udah on wine. It's not just enough to have a little l'chaim, like says the Ramah in Purim. You have a little schnapps to make a biyotze, and then you go to sleep. So, but of course, you don't have to get drunk on Shabbos, but there's other beverages. Beverages that people enjoy more past just water is angoy ba'achila v'shtia. It's part of the shtia. Okay? So that's already, we have clarified. So that's the main fulfillment of Enoch Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe repeats this idea in Siman Reish Peiches, that it's not just the definition the Chacham said, but it's the main way it's fulfilled. So the following are all basically subcategories of what the Chacham later defined as additional things done for the sake of Enoch Shabbos. Eating bread, which is discussed in Siman Reish Ayin Hey 274, Shayin Daled, is also due to the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos, as bread is the staple of a meal, and therefore a person is obligated to eat bread on Shabbos for the sake of Enoch Shabbos. Hot foods, eating hot foods. There's a special institution to eat hot foods on Shabbos. This is likewise for the sake of Enoch Shabbos. We have many halachas relating to hot foods. We went through this in our previous form of this course, of the laws of Atmana, the laws of Shehiyah, the laws of Chazara, all relating to hot food. So eating hot food on Shabbos is part of the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos. Let's already point out on these two things we mentioned. Therefore, those who are dieting and don't eat bread during the week should take off on Shabbos and should go ahead and eat bread on Shabbos. If a person is told by their dietitian or doctor, there is no type of bread that is good for you, meaning, what does it mean good for you? You will suffer stomach aches, or it'll have an adverse effect on your blood pressure, anything that's serious or immediate, then obviously a person is not commanded to make himself temporarily enjoy Shabbos and then pay a big price later on. On the other hand, if a person is simply on, on what's the no-carb diet? What's it called?
Paleo.
There are a bunch of them already.
Okay, there's a lot of them. Okay. So whoever's on the no-carb diet and not eating bread during the week, certainly they should eat at least a kibetz of bread on Shabbos day and Shabbos evening for the sake of Enoch Shabbos, and they shouldn't take Shabbos away for this reason. Hot foods is the same story. Some people, they don't prepare hot foods, they eat cold foods. They say, what's the need? No, there's a special mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos to eat hot food. Everyone knows that hot meat, hot fish is better than cold. If in a restaurant you ordered a ribeye steak and they gave it to you cold, would you go back there? Would you tip the waiter? Would you be fuming inside, maybe get up and leave? Right? So we don't do, so for God also. For God, we are waitering Him. We are waiting ourselves for the purpose of waitering Him. So,
Is there a sense of pleasure that we ourselves have that's relevant for Enoch of Shabbos?
100%. The purpose is, we explained this last week, the person receives Einig, pleasure, and that pleasure incorporates within it subconsciously pleasure and godliness that's in it. That's why the Chachamim obligated in all those things that the people receive pleasure in, a person should indulge in on Shabbos, and they made a list. So we already said bread, and the second thing is regarding hot foods. So that's why a person should have cholent on Shabbos day. It's not just at night. Mitzvah of Einig applies by both meals. And that's why it's the Jewish custom to have cholent. It wasn't made up because some Hungarian chef came up with a tasty dish of all the leftovers of the week. And it became very popular because it was economical, economically proven to work for the Jewish people, but rather because it fulfills the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos. And that's why we have the laws of Atmana we went through. So we have a whole bunch of halachas that are all surrounding this idea of eating hot foods, which people keep. The Munkacher in Nemuke Erech Chaim writes that those who do not eat hot foods on Shabbos, we suspect that they are from the Tzedekим. And even if they aren't from the Tzedekim, they're doing something that's anti-Chachamim. Why? Because the Chachamim established you should eat hot food, and the Tzedekим opposes that don't eat hot food. So even if you're not eating it for other reasons, you don't even know who Tzedekim are, you have nothing to do with any of this. Nonetheless, the fact that it became a food representing, following the will of the sages, when a person eats it, he says, eating cholent every bite helps for his kashrus to the sages. So people look for many different ways of l'skasher l'tzadikim, every bite of cholent, hot cholent, right? Sadokim, Sadducees. Okay, but a person doesn't eat it, so that's something that the sages required. Number 3. Lighting Shabbos candles. There's 2 reasons why we light Shabbos candles, as we will learn in chapter 263, Reish Samach Gimel. And the main reason is for the sake of Enoch Shabbos. It's very beautiful to eat near candlelight. Even if you have electricity, it's still nice. It makes everything more romantic, more beautiful. It changes the scenery, and therefore that's part of the mitzvah Enoch Shabbos. And from there we can understand that to fulfill this, obviously the candles have to be in an area that you can see them during your meal. If you can't see the candles during your meal, you are missing out on this main aspect of Enoch Shabbos, of candle lighting. That doesn't mean that all the candles have to be there. If you're lighting 50 candles, okay, then you can have 2 candles on the table, and you can have the rest of them somewhere else. But there should be some of these Shabbos candles should be on the table. Or, according to Kabbalah, on the table. Here in Tzfas, we don't want to stir up with anyone, right? Put it on the table, make the Kabbalists happy. That's what the Rebbitzin did. Candles were lit on the table, but only if you're going to be using long wax candles. If you're going to be using the tea candles, what are they called? Those tea lights. Or you're going to be using oil. Big problem, because if you shake the table, you shake the oil. If you shake the oil, you do the malacha of mafir and mechaber, and it's just not good. So therefore,
what's wrong with the tea lights vis-a-vis
it turns into oil. It's just like oil. Just because it wasn't oil when you lit it doesn't mean it's not oil later on.
So the long sticks are better? That's what you're
100%, because you don't have an accumulation of oil that swirls around.
second best is to have it at least within...
If you have oil or tea lights, don't light it on the table, unless your table is stationary and doesn't move.
So within view is okay.
Yeah. Within view is also okay, but again, according to Kabbalah, we light on the table. We will discuss all these details in chapter 263. Number 4 is sleeping on Shabbos, right? Sleeping on Shabbos is considered Enoch Shabbos, as written in chapter 281, Reish Pei Aleph. That means that what it says that a person will sleep a little more than usual. It actually does not mention anything about a Shabbos afternoon nap. That is just a custom that some people have, but what it does say is regarding sleeping into the day, that if you normally start Shachris at 8 o'clock, so you start at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and you get a little more sleep in the day. Marital relations, intimacy on Shabbos is included in the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos. It's in chapter 280, as we will learn. And as the Alter Rebbe writes in chapter 306, Shin Vav, which is basically from 2 weeks ago's Parshas Yisrei, right? It says that on Shabbos a person is to rest from malacha. Says the Alter Rebbe, this means not just that you don't physically perform any malacha, any work, but furthermore that you do not even entertain any mundane activities in your mind, and you keep your mind, and you don't worry about anything that you normally worry about, a business deal, whatever it is that you normally worry about during the week, come Shabbos, you don't worry about it at all. All your needs you view as if they are taken care of. And therefore, that's why we, even though min hadin, from the letter of the law, a person is allowed to speak about things on Shabbos that relate to the mundane week, so long as it don't involve a malacha, such as if someone has a very tight schedule and they're trying to figure out how they're going to work out and going to all these meetings and all these people. There's no isser min hadin. There's no isser to hold a meeting on Shabbos. So you're allowed to talk about it, but nonetheless, that would negate the fulfillment that we're saying here, that Shabbos, a person is to view all of his needs and worries as taken care of. Basically, Shabbos is the ultimate day of vacation where you remove your mind from all stresses. You get once a week free of stress, which is a great gift for the Jewish people. The Goyim don't have this. Just imagine the poor Goyim. They have 7 days a week where they have to worry about to answer emails and look at this, It's tough. It's not easy being a guy. A yid, if he follows what God has given us, this gift, the whole day, 24 hours, you don't have to worry about anything. The other day, I saw people on Friday night talking in shul about politics. I said, what are you doing? This is for during the week. Shabbos, you have one day you can clear your mind, relax. What are you guys getting so excited about? So one of them told me that's who he gets its einig. I said, wow, that's really low. That's really low. That's really sad. Anyways. Okay, so that was our 6th list, right? We said 6 things under there, which we will all discuss later on as we get to the various chapters.
The chapters that you named, when you said we'll discuss this more in blah, 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 is that chapters only in the Alter Rebbe, or will we find in the Mechaber also discussing that further?
It's the chapters of the Mechaber as well, but not all of them are written in the words of the Mechaber. Eating bread, the Mechaber writes about. Eating hot food, the Mechaber writes about. Lighting candles, the Mechaber writes about, but not all of them that we mentioned here he does.
I've rarely seen people have candles on the Shabbos table.
Well, we are all about change, right? That's what we're all about. Every day is about change.
Everyone else usually?
Remember my original Rav, he would always have a table. He was a Moroccan Kabbalist. Even outside of
As we said, the Rebbetzin lit candles on the table. That's the minhag according to Kabbalah. So why not? Why not? What's the hefsed? What's the loss in doing it? No one says it's aser, unless it's made of oil, as I said. But if you have wax, stick candles, you're only gaining and making the Kabbalists happy.
Excuse me, tell me again, what's the issue with the oil on the table?
Because it shakes. Shakes this way, it moves away from the wick, you're causing more wick to burn. Shakes back that way, causes more wick to be consumed under the oil and extinguished. So
That's before, just if you happen to hit the table.
if you shake the table, anything, you put you like this, you get up. You know, a lot of people get up. It's a real interesting attitude you pay attention to. Do you move yourself so you move, or do you move the table so you move? So some people, they move the whole table. It's not for them to move. They move the whole table, So it shakes, you have to know your crowd. If you're eating by yourself, you're the only person on the table, you can control yourself, okay. But if you have anyone else, you're bound to enter banging, a lot of different things. It's just not worth it to enter into the situation. So you have a simple solution. It's called stick candles. They're still manufactured. You don't have to travel to India to get them. They buy them and sell them in stores. Okay. Kavod Shabbos. So now we're going to go through our list of Kavod Shabbos, which we already read inside last week, as the Alter Rebbe writes, that the sages define, meaning the main mitzvah of Kavod Shabbos is having nice clothing, big day Shabbos. So wearing Shabbos clothing, according to the one approach we said, is a biblical command. It's not just a nice thing, it's a custom of Jewry. No, it's a biblical command or a rabbinical command, but it's a command. It's an instruction. A person who walks around with his regular weekday clothing, so he doesn't fulfill this mitzvah. And that's why it's become widespread that even during Shabbos of Shiva and Shabbos of Tisha B'Av, almost nobody follows the approach of wearing weekday clothing. How can you on Shabbos negate the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos, Kavod Shabbos, which is biblical or rabbinical? And that's why most of Jewry today wear Shabbos clothing, even during Shiva.
Is there a time when it didn't?
Yeah, European Jewry, Ashkenazi Jewry for a long time. Very machmir in yanin of sadness. But Baruch Hashem, the Gra came along and he abolished a lot of that. The Chassidim came along and abolished a lot of that. And as we've mentioned many times, the a lot of the Hasidic initiatives the Gra also took along, and that's why it's been abolished from most of the Ashkenazi world, thanks to two great luminaries, the Alter Rebbe and the Gra, spreading those ideas. Kavod Shabbos. So that's our main thing is through wearing clothing. We have a number of subcategories. One of them we already read inside the Mechaber last week. We will discuss that in depth today, Meretz Hashem, and that is the baking of challahs for Shabbos, as opposed to buying from a bakery, right? What did the Mechaber they write? The Mechaber wrote it's included in the mitzvah of Kavod, Shabbos, and Yontif. It's part of Kavod. Right, it's interesting why he doesn't include it in Eineg. Maybe it's the idea of knowing, wow, I have fresh homemade challah sitting on my table is a little different than, I have bakery bought challah sitting on my table. It's more, it's a good question. If anyone can come up with a reason, I'll be happy to hear it.
The eating of it is on it. That falls into on
It depends how it tastes. But usually the smell, doesn't matter how the bread tastes, the smell of fresh baking bread, it adds to the atmosphere of the home. It really changes the atmosphere of the home. But how it tastes is, every woman bakes differently. Okay.
If you want a nice, easy challah recipe, Shayna's recipe is very, very good. We use it. It's great.
Okay, bathing in hot water before Shabbos obviously is included in the mitzvah of honoring Shabbos. Bathing in hot water on Shabbos is included in the Isser of breaking Shabbos. So let's be aware of that. This is talking about Erev Shabbos specifically. And so therefore, a person should not just say, well, I went to mikvah and I'm all good. If he didn't have hot water, if it was a cold mikvah, he needs to take a hot shower. And chas v'shalom to, as we said, belittle these Jewish traditions that are all based on takanos of the sages. That is discussed in greater length in chapter 260, Reish Samach. Another one which we discussed the past few weeks in daily halachah is removing cobwebs from the walls and roofs. That's included in honoring Shabbos, not to have, we'll discuss in greater length why when we reach that chapter. Again, this is in chapter 262. We will discuss then all the details. But bottom line is that we clean the cobwebs from the house so we don't enter into Shabbos with them. Cutting one's hair and nails on Erev Shabbos is also part of honoring Shabbos. Hair, it's based on necessity, how long of hair does a person have, but nails is supposed to be done every single week. Every Erev Shabbos, the mitzvah is to cut the nails, every single one, as is written in chapter 260, we're going to get to this.
Right.
Hand nails, yes.
Not that if
Yeah, well, I mean, if they're big and they, get in the way.
Is there a time frame you can do it after chatzos?
The nails, you can do whenever you want Erev Shabbos.
But hair cutting, no.
Hair cutting also. Because according to the Arizal, hair cutting we do before Chatzos, but we don't rule that way. Some people do. When I say we, I said the rules of the Alter Rebbe and Shulchan Aruch do not take into account his opinion, and therefore you can get a haircut past Chatzos. He explicitly rules that way. It's not a problem. Another part of the list, another mitzvah, recorded in chapter 529. This is in Hilchos Yontif, that is part of the mitzvah of Kavod Shabbos, and that is that we do not eat a meal on Erev Shabbos past the 10th hour of the day, in order so we can eat the Friday night meal with satiation, with desire, with an appetite. So abstaining from a meal starting from 3 hours before sunset, it's 3 Zmanius hours, so it fluctuates based on summer, winter.
A meal means dafka bread?
Yeah. We're talking about bread, yeah. We'll get into all those details again.
A little snacky food is okay after that.
Yeah, chapter 249, we're not too far from us. Another 7 Simonim, we're going to get up to that. We're going to discuss this. Another one part of the list in chapter 262, Reish Samach Bais, is setting the Shabbos table on Erev Shabbos. Not to wait until the family comes back from shul and only then you set the Shabbos table, and until you start the meal, everyone's already upset, you start the meal on the left foot. Part of Kavod Shabbos is that everything is ready, so as soon as you come home, Kiddush. Right? I think we can have a good consensus that most people don't enjoy waiting after they come home from shul, having to wait a half hour, an hour, until the table's set and everything's taken care of.
When are you allowed to open the wine?
When are you allowed to open wine?
Yeah.
Open before Shabbos.
You can do it, it's not a problem doing it.
It's a shayla to do it on Shabbos. To do it before Shabbos for sure not a problem. The best thing is anything that needs to be open should always be open before Shabbos. That has nothing to do with the list of einig and kavod. That has to do with simply avoiding machlekes, avoiding entering into disputable situations. So the best thing is open everything before Shabbos. You avoid the problems, right? If we can circumvent the discussions in the Paiskim, why enter into the machlekes?
Some people
For sure,
say
everything.
when they open the wine, it is better to leave it open because it has better taste, they say.
Right,
I don't know.
right.
Because some
It
people,
depends. Probably with the cheap wines, I don't imagine that. I don't know. I don't know. But according to halacha, you're not supposed to leave your wine open, and l'chatchila, not even for a moment. We try not to leave our wine open at all. A lot of people think that if I left my wine bottle open when I said kiddush, then now I invalidated the whole bottle for kiddush. That's nonsense. That's
yeah,
not
I
true.
mean, before, just
What
before
is
Shabbat,
true is that
open
we are
and leave it
makbid to
open.
always cover the wine bottle. Nothing to do with kiddush. Always cover the wine bottle because the chatchila, we want it to always stay fresh for whenever someone wants to do kiddush on it. Doesn't invalidate it. Doesn't make it that you can't do kiddush on it. But the chatchila, we want it to always be covered, always to remain covered. So that's before kiddush. That's after kiddush. But somebody has a special taste of wine, and they know when they let their wine air out for some time, okay, gesundheit, no problem. It's for the benefit of the wine, right?
It has to air it.
I don't know. For me, it won't make a difference. So for me, it would be usher. The only time I think you need air out wine is when it tastes like vinegar, and then hopefully, right? That's for me. Not everyone has a taste for these things. Wine is something very delicate. You have some people, you can give them a $1,000 bottle, they won't tell the difference. Why wasn't this sold for 10 shekel? They don't understand. Okay. So setting the Shabbos table, as I said, that's in 262. Then we have preparing on Erev Shabbos, all the matters that has to need preparation, cleaning the house, etc. So when a person comes back from shul, everything's arranged. It's part of the previous one, but this would include setting up the chairs, near the table, whatever it is, anything that needs to be done in order to move on with Shabbos preparation. Having a tablecloth on one's table. The minhag is to use a white tablecloth, but the idea of having a tablecloth covering the table not to see the bare wood or bare metal or the plastic is part of the mitzvah of kavod Shabbos. It's honorable when you have a separate covering, and that's why minhag Yisrael is in shuls and in homes. We always put a white tablecloth on the tables to cover it, part of Enoch Shabbos, the kavod Shabbos. And last but not least is we have the mitzvah of Milava Malka. The mitzvah of Milava Malka is part of kavod Shabbos. By having a parting meal, you fulfill the mitzvah of kavod Shabbos, as it says, just like you have to honor Shabbos in its entrance, so too you have to honor it in its exit. That is something we'll be discussing chapter 300 in length. Okay, that's the end of our list. We're gonna go through one short question, then we're gonna begin detailing.
Flowers are not part.
Buying flowers is part of kavod isha, respecting the wife. It's nothing to do with Shabbos. There is a minhag on Shavuos to have flowers in the home. But for Shabbos, there is no requirement to buy flowers. It's a nice initiative if someone wants to. Obviously, anything someone does to make the home look prettier or nicer, the kavod Shabbos fulfills the mitzvah. But it's not something that the sages picked out. They didn't delineate that this is something you should do. So if somebody wants to do it, of course, they get schar. It's a big, whatever they do, the kavod Shabbos is nice. But it's not an actual chiyuv. Why do we not say a bracha prior to doing any of these things? Right? We have a mitzvah deraisa derabanan of kavod and Enoch Shabbos. Seemingly, we should be able to go ahead and say a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvayso v'tzivanu al kavod Shabbos when I put on my Shabbos clothing, or al Enoch Shabbos when I eat the food. So we have a number of reasons that are recorded. One of the best ones is in the Torah Shabbos, an Achron from 200 years ago, a little less, in which he writes the following, that the rule is, any mitzvah that you do, that you receive physical enjoyment from, we can't say a bracha on it, because we're not exactly sure why a person's doing it. He could be doing it because of the pleasure. So, to say a bracha v'asher kedeshanu when eating a yummy, delicious steak, it could be asher kedeshanu, it could be he likes eating steak. On the other hand, we find that regarding karbanis, the kohanim, get ready, okay, say a bracha v'asher kedishonim says von al achilas kachim. Before you eat your steaks, your shlomim steaks, your tater steaks, whatever steaks they're going to give you, you have to say a bracha v'asher kedishonim. But other than that, we never say a bracha, and that's because that food is considered purely kus. When you eat that, you're going to feel an ecstatic experience, and none of us non-priests will ever have, unfortunately. And so this, you say a bracha. Huh? It's automatic.
I'm looking forward to it.
That's why I don't eat steak now.
It's a mitzvah deraisa to eat the kachim meat. So, but on the other hand, on regular different things that we receive enjoyment from, so we can't physical enjoyment, we don't say a bracha over it. Others explain that when we say the bracha of candle lighting, it includes the mitzvah of kavod on Enoch Shabbos. That's included within the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos. When we say Shabbos Kodesh, which we already said was initiated due to Einig and kavod, it also has an aspect of kavod, as explained in chapter 263. And according to that, it is proper for the husband and whoever else to listen and hear the blessing when his wife says it, as then he too gets included.
I didn't get this.
It is proper for the spouse, the husband, usually the husband, to listen in and hear the blessing when it is recited. Candle lighting, yeah. On Malka Shabbos. Others say, we have another stop that's included in the bracha over Kiddush. When you say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos, which fulfills the biblical command of sanctifying Shabbos, it as well fulfills the mitzvah of saying a blessing before you receive pleasure and einig and kavod of Shabbos. Okay, so these are the different answers offered. We're now going to move on to the beginning of Sif Aleph, with the words of the Machaber they state in Sif Aleph, which we read last week. We'll read it again. Afilu mishatzarech la'acherim. Again, we're in Sif Aleph, the beginning. We read this last week. We're repeating. Even someone who is in need of others, meaning he doesn't have a lot of money, he is quite an ani. Im yesh le ma'at mishaloi. If he has a little bit of his own, tzarech l'zaraz atzma, he must hasten himself. L'chabed es Shabbos, to honor Shabbos, l'mas Shabbos chachil. And the sages do not say, turn your Shabbos into a weekday and do not become a burden onto the public. El mishashat chukale be'yoser. It's only regarding someone who is in a very pressing situation. Okay, however, regular people, tzarech l'tzamtzim b'shar yamim, he must ration himself during all the days of the week, l'chabed es Shabbos, in order so we have extra funds or extra foods available for Shabbos itself. So we're going to split these three lines of the Machaber into two separate halachas. One is we're going to discuss the background, which is discussed in the Achronim, including the Alter Rebbe and the Mishnah Berurah, regarding what is the basic minimum menu of a Shabbos that I have to have, the minimum, as well as we're going to discuss borrowing money for that purpose, when it's allowed, when it's not. Here he made a statement, don't throw yourself onto the public unless you need to. What does it mean you need to? What's the definition? So we're going to go through all these details of exactly defining using public funds, charity funds, or borrowing money, or asking for a present, etc. So let's begin. The Alter Rebbe here explains in Sif Bais, Reishman Bais Sif Bais, that the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos, right, that the sages had made it as a requirement. Oh, it's from this one. Has a minimum menu that needs to be, that a person needs to have on Shabbos. So he says the following. Einig, how is Einig fulfilled? The mitzvah of Einig Shabbos is filled through foods that the general populace receive Einig from. So every country has different levels of luxury, different status of what they consider a luxurious food for that area. And that's what would make the difference of fulfilling Einig Shabbos. For example, if in a certain country they have a surplus of meat and they're like eating meat all day and all night and that's what they live off. For example, if you the northern Norwegian areas, they live off salmon. So to have salmon for Shabbos would be, oh, come on, again, right? But for us, having a nice big salmon for Shabbos is amazing. Wow, that's beautiful Einig. However, you give them a nice piece of Argentinian rib steak, they'll be very happy. So it all depends on the country, right? It depends on what are their normal eating cuisine, what's considered a delicacy, and what is not. Now, Rebbe, based on this, then states, meat and wine. Although there is no obligation to eat specifically meat and wine, nowhere does it say in the Torah, nor do the Chachamim say, thou must eat meat and drink wine on Shabbos. Since these beverages most people receive einig from, pleasure from, wine and eating meat, so therefore that's why it was singled out as an example of Enoch Shabbos that should be having. That's why we are, Jewish people are Malka, we have meat or chicken and wine on the Shabbos table for the sake of fulfilling this mitzvah. However, if there's a person who does not like meat, he likes chicken, then there's no mitzvah to eat specifically meat, to eat specifically something you do not enjoy. So in that situation, he say, okay, you don't have to have meat, you can have chicken. But if somebody likes both meat and chicken, it's definitely Enoch Shabbos to have meat as opposed to chicken. Here in Eretz Yisrael, most people have chicken Friday night, not meat Friday night. And the reason is simply for economical reasons. Meat is a lot more expensive, but nonetheless, ideally, there's a greater mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos on meat. However, as we know, red meat contains a lot higher cholesterol level. So somebody who doesn't want to have the buildup of week after week of high flesh cholesterol, so that's a good excuse. That's a good excuse. He can fulfill his einig with chicken. It's not a problem. The Alter Rebbe then mentions fish, and he says that eating fish is including mitzvah Enoch Shabbos in the times of the Talmud, Mizman Chochmei Agamar, this is in Sif Bais, they would have large fish to eat on the Shabbos table. What are these large fish referring to? Who are these large fish? So the Gemara there mentions the shibuta. There's Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yutes, Samad Aleph. The shibuta. What's the shibuta? The teacher of the Or Zarua, his name was Rabbeinu Simcha, says the shibuta is the large tuna. They would have a large tuna fish. Tunas are huge. We look at them as small cans, but that's like 100 of them. Right? Tunas are huge. I think they're the largest kosher fish. I don't know all the kosher fish, but it's quite large. Okay, so they would have this large shibuta on the table, and that's how they fulfilled their Enoch Shabbos, fresh tuna. And again, this is because in that time, this was considered the delicacy. And that's why they would engage in it. That's why they would indulge in specifically fish. But this goes on each and every country. The type of today, if you get tuna steaks, people will say, yeah, he's being cheap. If you get salmon, oh, that's a delicacy. Depends where you are, right? It depends on the area. So, but nonetheless, the idea of eating fish is part of the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos. And before we get a little more into the reasons of eating fish, we'll just mention a story. As I said, it happened with the teacher of the Or Zarua, Rabbeinu Simcha. So when he said that the shibuta is the tuna fish, the large tuna fish, until that time in his area, people didn't eat the tuna. They didn't know if it was a kosher fish. There's some types of fish that when they come out of the water, they lose their fins. It's like their scales. It's their way of aborting, I guess, their armor. I don't know. So this is what happened with the tuna, with this specific, there's many species of tuna, with this type of tuna, and when he paskin that it's kosher, because inside the ocean it contains its fins and scales. So this was a bit of a chiddush for the community, and they were going to enjoy the tuna fish for the first time that Shabbos. And that evening, Rabbeinu Ephraim had a dream. And in his dream, who does he see? He sees the Satan, a real monstrous-looking individual with 1,000 eyes, looking at him and telling him, "Agreiser Yasher Koyach for helping me fulfill my mission in feeding shkatzim urumashim to the Jewish people. Thank you." So as you can imagine, he woke up from such a dream quite stunned. He came to the Bais Medrash Friday morning. He said, "Guys, heter's off. No heter, no tuna fish. Heter is off." But that was his personal chumrah. L'mais in the Shulchan Aruch, it's ruled that it is kosher. I don't know what they did in that city, but nonetheless, we do eat the shibuta, we do eat this the tuna fish on Shabbos, and not just on Shabbos.
Tuna not in place of red meat. Red meat is the best, but adding fish is good.
Listen, the more the merrier. Einig is fulfilled, the more the merrier. Now, what it sounds from the Gemara is that there was one specific delicacy picked as the main einig, and some chose fish. Some fish is more expensive than meat. So, as we've been saying many times, it doesn't have to be specifically meat. Meat just happens to be, a lot of people get einig from it, but a lot of people also get einig from fish. Today, the custom is to have fish, a fish course, and also a meat course, as the Rosh says, B'nai Yisrael, adukim the mitzvahs Enoch Shabbos. We are very careful in the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos, so therefore we bring everything on the menu that there is some einig with. The Alter Rebbe then continues in Sif Zayin. And he says, that the idea of eating that right, that it's good to be careful, it is proper, it is good to be careful that a person should eat meat during every single meal. Fish during every single meal. It's proper to eat fish during every single meal. And so in other words, in addition to the fact that we have some people who fulfill the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos specifically with fish, we have for everybody a special mitzvah of always eating fish by every meal, and this is explained in Sifrei Kabbalah, Sefer Charedim, who is buried right next to the Ramak, the Arizal. He explains in the Sefer that the reason for this is because the fish contain the souls of the tzaddikim, of the righteous, and they come back for Shabbos to be elevated to higher levels. When we eat them, the covered Shabbos, and so that's why we should engage in eating fish by every single meal, as the Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur, especially the third meal, Shalosh Shudas. Especially Shalosh Shudas, that's the best time for eating fish. And the reason is as follows. Why do the tzaddikim specifically choose fish? Why not choose a nice cow or a sheep? There's many beautiful animals. Why do they choose fish? And the reason, fish have the most refined meat of the different meats that are available for us to eat, right? A person that eats chicken has a certain level of cholesterol that he's consuming within his body. Red meat, even more. Fish, however, not only doesn't have bad cholesterol, but a lot of fish has good cholesterol, omega-3, right? Omega-3 oil. Fish is a more delicate, refined meat, and that's why also we find that it doesn't eat shchita. Why doesn't a fish need shchita? Because it is refined already enough as it is to be consumed by a Jew. But chicken and cows, they have grubness, they have animalistic tendencies that need to be elevated and refined prior to being consumed by a Jew. And that's why we have the mitzvah of shchita, of one of the pipes by a chicken and two of the pipes by a cow. However, fish does not require this. So the tzaddikim, they go specifically to the refined form of meat, which is fish, and when we eat them, we are elevating the souls of the tzaddikim.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but when the Rebbe Rishab said we don't need to eat bread, basically, he says mezainis, he talks about mezainis, he talks about fruit. Does he mention fish? I don't think so.
Right, so the person who mentioned fish was his great-grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe mentions him in the Siddur.
So he's not saying contrary to that, he's just not mentioning it all.
Yeah, why understand it contrary?
Huh?
Why understand it to be contrary?
Because he mentions specifics and he doesn't mention.
No, he just says you don't have to eat bread. He says you don't have to eat bread, but a person should taste something. He doesn't say what to taste. So taste fish.
Okay, I didn't know that. I thought it was an option in the Lubavitch world of the Siddur Shlishi to have something if you want, fruit, whatever, but it wasn't at all like recommended even necessarily. It was for years and years.
It should especially be eaten by the third meal, Alter Rebbe in the Siddur. It's written straight up there, and therefore I don't think it's a big sin to follow what the Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur and eating fish for the third meal, right?
Or eating something, right?
That's a chiyuv. That's a sin if you don't. There's an obligation to eat Shalosh Shudas. It's not something that's optional.
Because the Rebbe
No, what I said was Shalosh Shudas. There's different ways of fulfilling the mitzvah of Shalosh Shudas. The meal menus for Shalosh Shudas are a little different than the menus here. Okay, that's explained in chapter 291. When we get there, we'll discuss the menu for Shabbos Shudas. All these things that we're mentioning are really they're mainly during the first 2 meals that we follow them. But during the 3rd meal, there's like 5 opinions in Rishonim that we're going to see. But everyone agrees you have to have Shabbos Shudas. What you have to eat is a discussion. So according to the opinion who says all you have to eat is a bite of a fruit, how long does it take? So you're not going to call it a meal. So therefore people say, oh, we're not eating Shabbos Shudas. But halachically we are. When you're taking a bite, when you're having a little piece of fish, you're fulfilling Shabbos Shudas according to that opinion. You understand? But to go and not eat anything, the truth is most people fulfill Shabbos Shudas whether they like it or not, and I'll explain to you why. They eat in the especially Lubavitchers. You have some azaynis before davening in the morning, so you have strength. Then usually you have a Fabregan or a Kiddush after, and then you only later on you wash. So you've had not only Shabbos Shudas, you had Arba Seudos. You had a 4th meal already. You had a lot of meals. So, but nonetheless, a person should be careful to taste something, to eat something at the very least. Shabbos afternoon, preferably after Mincha, before Shkia, of course, preferably, for the sake of fulfilling Shabbos Shudas. And as we just read, the best thing is to get the fish in, especially in this city, the city of the Kabbalists. That's where this is discussed, Sefer Charedim, the idea of eating fish. He actually goes as far and as writes, it's an absolute biblical obligation. If you look here in the footnote, over here is the Kuntras Achron, those of you who have the Alter Rebbe. Footnote over here, the Alter Rebbe would write a lot of his own novelties in Torah and discuss different matters. So here he brings what it says, Sefer Charedim, that you should. It's an actual biblical obligation to eat fish, and he completely negates it. He says, guys, no source for this in the Shulchan Aruch, no source for this in the Talmud. It's not a biblical obligation. If you happen to like fish, then you fulfill the mitzvah of einig with fish, according to the approach that says that einig is biblical. But not that every individual has an obligation to eat fish. And therefore he concludes that if a person eating for him fish is hazardous for his health, or he hates fish, he gets repulsed by fish, he does not have to eat it.
We're not talking about 3rd meal now, you're talking in general.
Any meal. Yes, a person who doesn't like fish or it's bad for his health. But what's the measurement he writes here? If you are repulsed by it more than you receive pleasure from it, more than you receive pain. So there's more pain than pleasure. That's the idea. That's the measurement. If there's more pain than pleasure, then that's when you can abstain. Next, the Alter Rebbe mentions in Sif Zion, based on the ruling of the Magen Avraham, based on the Arizal, these are infiltrations of rulings of Kabbalah that made it into the Shulchan Aruch, not mentioned in the Mechaber, that at the very least, even those who can't afford are to at the very least have 2 cooked dishes of foods on the Shabbos table by each meal, not necessarily the 3rd meal, but at least by the 1st and 2nd meal. Each person should have at the very least 2 cooked dishes. The Kaf HaChaim writes that a person who during a normal weekday meal has in any event 2 cooked dishes, then on Shabbos they should have 3. They should add more. So when we say cooked dishes, that would include, chicken and potatoes, that's already 2. Rice would be a 3rd one, soup would be a 4th one. Hummus, how do they make hummus? You got to cook the chickpeas, that's a 5th one. Okay? So anything that needs to go through a cooking process, a cooked dish, that is included in the minimum of 2, or at least 1 more than you usually do. So again, our minimum menu is challah, meat and wine, for those who don't hate meat. At least 2 cooked dishes, fish every meal. And now we come to the final ruling, the Alter Rebbe in Sif Gimel, that this is just a minimum menu, but the maximum menu is the sky is the limit. Person should increase as much as he can in Shabbos foods and other Shabbos needs, what he can afford. And as he records, based on the Gemara, I believe in Eruvin, that what you spend for fulfill the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos and Kavod Shabbos is not included in the yearly budget. So the more you spend, the more money you get allocated to your yearly budget that was decreed on Rosh Hashanah. So, meaning that during the week, if a person wants to buy an ice cream, and he doesn't need to have the ice cream, he should be aware that that 5 shekel is not coming back. That 5 shekel is part of his budget for the year. It's not going to make any more or any less than he needs for this year because he took this extra 5 shekel. However, on Shabbos, if a person buys extra for the sake of Shabbos, then it is Hashem replenishes him back. So this then introduces us to the next phase of the Mechaber's ruling, which is, should a person ever be reluctant or budget regarding Shabbos? So, what usually happens if a person goes above and beyond his financial capability is that often someone else will pay the price. Either the makolet who very willingly and happily agreed to do business with you and let you put a debt onto the card under your name. You now have 1,000 shekel of Shabbos delicacies, and then a week later comes time to pay, and you tell him, sorry, I don't have. So who ends up paying? Who ends up fulfilling the mitzvah of Enoch Shabbos? The store owner. The store owner, in the end, funded this individual's Enoch Shabbos. So obviously there has to be some, or let's say you borrowed money. So what are the limitation regulations here? So this is, the Mechaber touched upon this. He didn't give exact details. This is what we're going to touch upon right now. The Alter Rebbe discusses this in greater length in Sif Gimel, also brought in the Mishnah Berurah, Sif Gimel, and Sif Daled. He begins with borrowing money. May a person borrow money for the sake of Enoch Shabbos and Kavod Shabbos? Answer. The Mechaber already mentioned, we read inside, make your Shabbos like a weekday and don't throw yourself onto the public. This isn't just regarding asking for charity, it's even regarding borrowing. And he says the following is the rule. If you have collateral to give the lender of worth of the item that you of the amount of money you're borrowing or more, then on that situation we say that the more the merrier, and Hashem will pay you back. Why? Because the person, you're not having bitachon on someone else's expense. He has how to collect the money. He has collateral. You gave him your cell phone. The cell phone's worth, you can sell it for at least 600 shekel, right? So 600 shekel. If he doesn't get a 600 shekel from the borrower, he'll sell the phone. He'll get his money. But if a person has no collateral or refuses to give collateral, so what is he doing? He's going ahead and borrowing on the expense of the lender. And on this it says, also Shabbos Chachel, make your Shabbos like a weekday and do not throw yourself onto the needs of the public.
There's a difference between borrowing money and asking for tzedakah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between borrowing money as opposed to asking for tzedakah.
Yes, tzedakah we will get to soon, and also like tzedakah or a favor, a present. Two different levels. We'll get to that. But again, to emphasize the point is that when a person does borrow with collateral, does borrow and gives collateral, in that situation he gets the blessing from Hashem of Chazal that Hashem will replenish his coffers, for him to pay back. But a person who borrows without collateral, the person has no way to collect. We can emphasize that if you know you're getting money from a certain source, and that's also similar to collateral. You have a way of paying the person back. So it's not, it's not in the expense of the other person. You know your salary's coming in 2 weeks, okay? So you know how to pay back. But if a person that doesn't know how he's going to pay back and no collateral collect, that's when Hashem says, stick me out, don't put me into this. I'm out of this transaction. And we also find this in the laws of Alva. It's recorded in Hilchos Alva and Chesed Mishpat. Alter Rebbe brings it in his section on the laws of lending and borrowing, that a borrower is forbidden from using up the money in a way that does not allow the lender to collect it. A person that's borrowing money, he has to have a way of paying back. If he has no way of paying back, then you don't have to lend it to him. The mitzvah, you can give tzedakah, that's something else. You want to give someone tzedakah? The mitzvah of tzedakah, but the mitzvah of halva'ah, to lend a Jew money, we read about in last week's parasha, is specifically if he can pay back. Because if he can't pay back, what in essence is happening here? Gneva. And you become an accomplice to his stealing. Because if you lent him money and he can't pay back, and you're not meichel, right? If the person's meichel, to say that he's meichel. If he's not meichel, I was speaking to an individual that someone owes him a lot of money. I said, why don't you take him to Bezdin? He says, no, I don't do those things. I'm a very nice guy. I'm like, really? So you're meichel him the money? So he tells me, no. So I said, so you mean you're a nice guy, but you want him to come back as a Gilgal and do a whole life over again to pay you back? So I never thought about it that way.
And he has to do what he did to receive the money.
One of his Yarshim, one of his descendants can do it for him.
Can you leave from this share also a minute or two for a question? We're at time, I don't know. We're at time. but
Okay.
anyway, that's another
One more thing.
Can you leave?
One more thing. Regarding borrowing money with interest, the Alter Rebbe here gives, not just the Alter Rebbe, it's brought in the Achreinim, the Magen Avram, the Mishnah Berurah, that it is permitted for a person to borrow money with the collateral, as we already explained, even if he will borrow under rabbinical interest terms. Meaning, there's two types of interest, ribbis. One is called ribbis deraisa, or ribbis ktsutza, and another is called ribbis derabbanan, rabbinical interest. All those types of interest that are only rabbinically forbidden, the Chachamim allowed you to transgress for the sake of Enoch Shabbos if you have collateral to give the guy. So if he says, I will lend you the money, and not a problem, and you gave him the collateral, and then when you came back, you knew this guy was someone who wanted something more in return, you gave him a few extra bucks, that's ribbis derabbanan, asur to do, but only derabbanan, for the sake of Kavod and Enoch Shabbos, it is permitted to be done. I want to conclude with the story from the Gemara. Go ahead. In the meantime, ask your question.
Making Kiddush, whether day or night, twice. Make it for my family. My daughter runs in late and says, oh, sorry, I missed, and I want to make Kiddush for her.
Let her make what? Baruch Hashem, she has great vocal skills. She knows how to read. She's literate. She can make Kiddush herself. Why can't you make Kiddush herself? It's not permitted for someone to make Kiddush on someone else's behalf if they have the full capability of doing it themselves. If they don't like wine, give them grape juice.
I mean, if we're talking about the case where it would be twice for me, obviously. the
I
original
understand. If you're making originally for yourself and for others, what's the problem? But the second you already yates and you want to make it again, we only allow a person to make Kiddush again in the event that the person hearing does not know how to do so.
Okay. Even an underage child could make Kiddush for themselves?
Why not?
Okay.
Yeah.
If you were Yotzi Kiddush at a Kiddush and then you went home, you shouldn't make Kiddush for your wife if she can make it herself?
Right. So when you're doing it for your children for the sake of chinuch, so then it's a little different because in that situation, not all your children necessarily know how to say it. Also, fathers allowed to educate his child and say brachas for his child. I'll look it up again, Lena, to be more clear on this, but that's the train of thought I recall. But if it's just for a wife, then the chatchila, the wife should make Kiddush herself. Right? Because she knows how to read.
Even if you already heard it, like he said, there's the case where
Yes.
the wife should do it
Yes.
herself.
By Havdalah, we have a greater problem because then it's usher for a man to make Havdalah for a woman if he was already Yaitse. It's machlekes if she's chayiv in Havdalah or not. But if there's children, you're allowed to make Kiddush because it's for chinuch of the children. So that's why I'm saying. So to here, if you have children.
You're talking about making Havdalah at home, not saying that would get married.
No, I'm not talking about marriage. I'm talking about you heard of Havdalah in shul.
I heard that.
You're coming back home. Okay, we'll conclude with 2 more minutes with a short story that the Gemara brings, the famous story of Yosef Maker Shabbos. Who never heard of this story, but it's a Gemara. We'll hear the Talmudic version, the original version of the story of Yosef Maker Shabbos, which has to do with, of course, the fish. Where am I? Should be in 119. Sechah Shabbos. Masechah Shabbos, page 119. The Gemara says the following: Yosef Maker Shabi. That's what the Gemara calls it. Shabi, not Shabbos. Shabi. Have hahu nachri b'shvavusei. There was a certain Gentile who lived in his neighborhood. The Have nofish nichsei tuva. He was very wealthy. He owned a lot of real estate. Amrli koldai. He had a visit with the local astrologers, and they told him, Kulu nechasei Yosef Maker Shabbos. Achlu. We see through our astrologic vision that Yosef Maker Shabbos will receive all of your belongings. What did he do to try to circumvent this? He right away sold everything that he had, Zavin Bu Marganisas, and he bought with it a small, precious diamond, jewel, whatever it was, precious stone. Oisva Besaina, and then he traveled on a ship and he says, Ha! I got him. He will never be able to get my money. As he was on the ship and going on the ocean, a wind came and blew his diamond away. Shadabamayit fell into the ocean. Bali kvara, it was then swallowed by a fish. A school isis afne b'mali Shabbata, and this fish was then caught and sold in the local market of Yosef Maker Shabbos. Amri man zavan ki hashta. It was already very late when they caught this huge fish, and it was very expensive. Nobody wanted to pay so much money for it, but they knew Yosef make a Shabbos. He will not hold back any payment for kavod on Enoch Shabbos. So they went to him. The market, the fishermen went to him. He bought it, he took it home, he split it open. He found a huge jewel inside. Zavne, he sold it. The Tlesa Ilsa did for 12 storehouses worth of gold coins. A certain elderly Rav met him and said, those who invest into Shabbos, Shabbos pays them back.